Okay, so the next part of complex numbers we're going to look at is division in complex numbers. It's a part that people do find difficult, so you may have to watch this tutorial a few times just to recap on it. Generally, when you're asked to divide in complex numbers, the question will look something like this. Z1 over Z2 or something over something. That means you're going to divide. In order to divide, we need to know first off how to find the conjugate. And the conjugate is in the chapter. So like finding the conjugate of complex numbers is actually a topic within the chapter. And just really quickly to recap what it is you change the sign of the imaginary number. And that should ring bells with you straight away. You should know that straight away. So anytime you're asked for the conjugate, and the symbol for conjugate actually is, if they're trying to find the conjugate of Z1, they put a little line over it like that. So that's how you find the conjugate. And to do so, you change the sign of the imaginary number. So for example, if Z1, we'll just use Z1 from over here, 3 minus 4i. The conjugate of Z1 is going to be 3 plus 4i, because we changed the sign of the imaginary number. So it was minus becomes plus. Alright, so we'll just get rid of all that for the minute. So when you're dividing complex numbers, it's really important to know this kind of method that you do. Okay, so they said to us, so let Z equal to 3 minus 4i and Z2 equal to 1 plus 2i, where I squared is equal to minus 1, so we will need that at some stage. Find Z1 over Z2 in the form x plus yi, where x and y are real numbers. The x just means, because there's no imaginary number, it's just the real number, and y is going to be your imaginary number. So it's just, your answer is going to be in that format. You're going to have something like 3 minus 4i. That would be in the same method, or same form. So Z1 divided by Z2. So first off, just like algebra, we can sub in. So if we sub it in, we put it in brackets. So 3 minus 4i all over 1 plus 2i. Right, that's fine. But in complex numbers, if you divide, you set out your division like so, like we've just done here, but you must multiply top and bottom, so you're going to make a fraction again, by the conjugate of the bottom. So I'm going to write conjugate of bottom, because that's really important. So you multiply top and bottom. Sorry, pen stopped working. So you multiply top and bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. So if we look at the bottom here, in this case it's 1 plus 2i. So we know that the conjugate of that is going to be 1 minus 2i. And as we said, we multiply top and bottom by the conjugate. So I'm just going to highlight that. That's so important. In division, you set out your fraction. So set out your division, and then you multiply your top and bottom by the conjugate. Right, so let's try to do this. So we're going to have, on the top line, it's 3 minus 4i multiplied by 1 minus 2i. Bracket on bracket because they're multiplying, obviously. And then on the bottom line, 1 plus 2i over 1 minus 2i. So just like in algebra, we can see that the top line are multiplying by each other, the bottom line are multiplying by each other. In algebra, we'd split our brackets. We do the exact same in complex numbers. The first video that we looked at on multiplication told us that as well. So we split our brackets. So the top line is going to be 3 on 1 minus 2i minus 4i on 1 minus 2i over 1 on 1 minus 2i plus 2i on 1 minus 2i. You have to be extremely careful of your signs and your numbers here when you're multiplying. Just make sure you don't make a mistake. So we just keep moving down. So 3 on 1 will be 3 minus 6i minus 4i plus 8i squared. That 8i squared is going to mean something to us, and that should be ringing an alarm in your head already. So 1 on 1 is 1 minus 2i plus 2i minus 4i squared. Again, the I squared is going to mean something to you. We all know that I squared is equal to minus 1. It's really important, okay? So, and it even told us that in the question. So we're going to start tidying it up. So again, it's just like algebra, keep your like with your like. So we've 3 minus 6i minus 4i, well, that'll give us minus 10i, plus 8. And because we have the I squared, my pen just stopped working again. Because we have the I squared, we sub in minus 1 for it. So we just talk through it. So on the bottom line, what you're going to have is 1. So your minus 2i and your plus 2i, well, they can just cross each other out because that's going to give you 0i. And then you have minus 4. And instead of the I squared, you're going to sub in into brackets minus 1. So, just pause this for a sec. Okay, right, we have it back. So plus 8 and minus 1. Okay, so I've just filled that in there. So instead of the minus 1, our I squared, we've subbed in minus 1. And as I said on the bottom line, minus 2i plus 2i will just cancel each other. So from there we'll go, so 3 minus 10i and plus 8 by multiplied by minus 1 will give us minus 8 all over 1. Minus 4 by minus 1 will give us plus 4. So we're going to have 3 minus 8. So 3 minus 8 gives minus 5. Minus 10i all over 5. So, well, 5 can divide into both of them numbers. So minus 5 divided by 5 will be minus 1. Minus 10i divided by 5 will be minus 2i. And that is your answer. So your answer is in the form, like they said, x plus yi. So for x we have minus 1 and for y we have minus 2. So that's all this part meant. But your answer is minus 1 minus 2i. So just to recap on what we did, so division in complex numbers, you need to know how to find the conjugate, because when you write out your fraction, you're multiplying the top and the bottom by that conjugate. Then it goes into multiplication, so you multiply your top line by each other, multiply your bottom line by each other. Remember that I squared is equal to minus 1. Just tidy up like your algebra, and then at the end you'll be left with your answer. It won't always, the bottom line won't always divide into top line. Sometimes you'll be left with fractions.